Why did you leave the former president's legal team?
So, as I said at the time, it had nothing to do with the case itself or the client. The real reason is because there are certain individuals that made defending the president much harder than it needed to be.
That was Timothy Parlatore, one of Donald Trump's former lawyers. Mr. Parlatore used to represent Trump in the Mar-a-Lago documents investigation. And since Parlatore left Trump's legal team a few weeks ago, we have known that there was trouble in paradise. But tonight, new reporting shows just how serious that trouble actually is. The Daily Beast is reporting about a meeting last month at Mar-a-Lago where several of Trump's lawyers threatened to leave. Two sources described the meeting to the Daily Beast as, quote, an intervention. The outlet says the lawyers' concerns here were twofold. Number one, Trump is under investigation for so many things that his legal team is massive, and these lawyers do not all get along. But more than not getting along, these lawyers are also wondering if one of them could be a snitch. Quote, what's really driving the deepest distrust is the way special counsel Jack Smith's investigators have started turning up the heat on Trump's own lawyers. By our count, at least 7 Trump lawyers have either testified to Jack Smith's grand jury or they have met with federal investigators. And it seems like these attorneys are starting to get worried about going down with the ship here. After quitting, Timothy Parlatore went on national television to say that another Trump lawyer, Boris Epshteyn, had attempted to interfere with Parlatore's search for classified documents at Trump's New Jersey golf club, which is not exactly the picture of everyone rowing in the same direction. And today, The Guardian is out with new reporting about the Trump lawyer who is the liaison between Trump and the DOJ. Evan Corcoran, that lawyer, was in charge of returning the classified documents to the department. Now, Corcoran reportedly told associates that in June of last year, he was waved off searching any room at Mar-a-Lago besides a single storage room. When Mr. Corcoran was looking for classified documents, he was told to check that one room and not to check anywhere else. He was waved off from searching places like Trump's office, which is where, of course, months later, the FBI would find the most highly classified documents. This reporting suggests, again, that not everyone is rowing in the same direction here, and it would also seem to buttress a potential obstruction case. A case that, if you read the reporting, already seems pretty strong. So at this point, it certainly seems like a lot of Trump lawyers are effectively saying, not it. And that makes sense. Remember that last week, the Washington Post and the New York Times reported that a Trump employee turned witness has told special counsel Smith that Trump ordered workers to move boxes back into the storage room right before his lawyer, Evan Corcoran, searched that storage room. And all that happened one day before federal investigators came to collect the documents. So was that Trump trying to mislead his own lawyers? Were some of Trump's lawyers also actively trying to mislead other Trump lawyers? And with so many lawyers testifying in these investigations, will any of them flip to save their own hides? We might not have to wait that long to find out. Bloomberg reported late last week that special counsel Smith is poised to announce criminal charges in this investigation in the days or weeks after Memorial Day, which was yesterday. We have lots to discuss. Joining me now is Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, and, of course, co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast. Joyce, thank you so much for being here tonight. I don't have a law degree, but a lot of people do, and a lot of them are working for Donald Trump and also have testified either to federal investigators or in front of the federal grand jury. I want to pull up this graphic we have. I think there are 7 Trump lawyers, by our count, who have either testified to the grand jury that the special counsel has convened or met with the DOJ investigators on this. That seems like an unusually high number to me, Joyce. Does that seem like a lot of lawyers to you? And do you think that these lawyers are actually emerging as potential liabilities for Donald Trump?
It does seem like an exceptionally high number, Alex. And to give it a little bit of context, DOJ prosecutors are required by policy to be very careful when they're dealing with someone's lawyer, especially when that someone is a target And I think it's safe to assume that in this case, people are being extremely rigorous about following those policies. So, for instance, you can't search a lawyer's office without jumping through a lot of hoops. Any sort of contact requires approval at high levels of the department. And what we've seen here repeatedly is a successful effort by prosecutors to pierce the attorney-client privilege with the crime fraud exception, which in essence means that Trump is either conspiring to engage in criminal activities with his lawyers, or he is using them. The lawyer may not know what they're being used for, but Trump is using their advice to perpetrate criminal conduct. That really adds up to a very unusual sort of situation here.
I would, in the same Daily Beast reporting, there is a list effectively of all the lawyers working on all the cases. And it is kind of a staggering number of attorneys. And first of all, the number of the number of probes, and then the number of lawyers working on those separate probes. I mean, give us a sense from your background on the flip side of this, how unusual it is to be battling so many legal fronts with a different uncoordinated group, a group of lawyers who are not coordinating their movements necessarily with the other groups, and how complicating that would be for a defendant.
Well, it's sort of tough for me to do that because I've never had a case against a former president who had 4 separate criminal investigations into his conduct. But I think the best sort of parallel that I can give you would be in a public corruption case, or perhaps in a white-collar fraud case where there are multiple allegations against a defendant or a group of people. And typically, there's a fairly unified command structure among the lawyers. Here we know that Evelyn Corcoran has done a lot of the coordinating with DOJ, and yet it doesn't always appear to be the case that he has the sort of contact with the client that you would expect someone in that role to have. Here's what you need to be able to do as the lawyer. If you're going to be certifying, for instance, that you've turned over all of the classified material or the presidential records material in your client's possession, then you need to be able to ascertain that from the client to a certainty. And you can't be restricted in your movements and where you search. So this entire notion that perhaps, this is, I guess, the worst case reading, but boxes were being moved in and out of storage areas before Corcoran was permitted to search, and that someone, maybe the president, maybe someone else, was going through those folders and perhaps removing material so it wouldn't be found. And it was only after that whole level of shenanigans that material was turned over to DOJ. That's not a position you would expect any lawyer in a functional team to be placed in.